staying safe. Thank you so much for joining us today on another session of UpStart. This August, PayU is celebrating Indian homegrown brands across sectors. I'm Sakshi. I'm part of the marketing team at PayU. As you all know, PayU is one of the leading payment service providers in India. We are across sectors like airlines, SMBs, and the startup community. Upstart and CodeUp is our way to empower businesses and startups like you by bringing in subject matter experts across departments and sectors of your particular interest and topic. The COVID pandemic has taught us the importance of immunity, good health, and fitness. I'm sure all of you have transformed your lifestyles, trying to make it a little more better each and every day. And this is what connects our today's session, which is on genomics in the pandemic age. I thank Anu for joining us here. Anu Acharya is the CEO and co-founder of Mapmygenome. Anu, thank you so much for joining us. And like we were discussing before, I am personally very excited to hear about this topic. It is new, it is different, at least for me, and I hope viewers who are watching us would equally like it. Anu, before you go ahead, I would just want to give a quick housekeeping to everybody who's watching. Thank you once again. You can drop your comments below. You can ask any of the questions you wish to on the comment section, and we would love to take it over. Anu, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Sakshi. It's a pleasure being here. PayU is a fantastic platform, so I'm glad to be participating in the session with all of you. I don't know how much all of you know about genomics, so I thought I would make it more about my journey and then put in some genomics so that it'll be sort of easier for all of you to understand. So let me share my screen for a second. It's not this one.
Yes, your screen is visible, Anu.
Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, okay. Just a second. All right. So can you see my screen?
Currently, no. I think it was visible a second before.
Let's see. Okay, let me try again.
No problem. So, while you're doing that, just again a reminder to everybody who's watching, please feel free to drop, questions or the comments, and Anu will or me will pick it up, post the session. Anu, I think, yes, we can see your screen now. Please, the floor is all yours.
Okay, great. Okay, I guess I'll have to, 1 second, yes, yeah. So let me first start off with a quick quote by Isaac Newton. I think for those of you who don't know, my background is in physics and not so much in biology, but I guess now it's been close to 22 years or so in genomics. So I can safely say I know more. I've been more in the genomics world than in the physics, but I started in physics. So one of the quotes that is probably the one that always has guided me quite a bit is by Isaac Newton, that says that if I've seen further, it is because of standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think when you look at the areas of development, especially the ones like genomics, we find that this is something that we could not have done if we did not have the research, if we did not have the science that the other scientists have done before us. So I think I believe, and I strongly believe, that our purpose in life and my purpose in life is to be able to make sure that that view that people are being able to see today can be made a little bit better, a little bit more interesting, and a little bit something more meaningful in their own life. So that's why I'm in the field of genomics, and I hope that we'll be able to do a little bit further than what the others have done before us. So just as a background, I grew up in a small campus town. It is in the town of Kharagpur, which is in Bengal. So even though I came from Rajasthan, I was basically grew up as someone in a small town in Bengal. So picked up a lot of Bengali, spoke Marwadi at home, but lived in a very cosmopolitan space. My dad was a professor. And I think for me, the only thing I really wanted to do at that point was to join IIT, and which I did. And at that point, I think I did want to do physics because I thought that was the coolest thing possible, and more so because my dad was a professor of physics, and I think our whole life depended on that. So I think that's sort of where I grew up in. And then went to Chicago, did my master's, a couple of masters, worked for a startup, consulted a startup, and it seemed like my whole life was moving around startups. Some in the telecom space, then in the web, social media space, and so on. And then eventually, I think I wanted to build something of my own and move back to India. And then around in 2000, I came back to India, and along with my co-founders, Dr. Sujata, who is based in the US, and Subhash, we started Osmom Biosolutions. And this was something that we had, I would say at that point of time, I think my knowledge of genomics was quite minimal, but so was the world's. And I think it was with confidence that you get on. And like most entrepreneurs, I jumped onto this because it seemed very exciting, and it was just around the time the Human Genome Project was getting just getting complete, and it was not yet fully complete, that we decided that this was something that could really engage me from an intellectual point of view, but also it would be something exciting for us to do. So I think that's why we started off in genomics, and this was something that I think that at that point of time seemed like an area that would grow. And at that point, I would say that genomics was more something that you would find that the big pharmaceutical companies were doing, and what a lot of research scientists were doing. It was not something that everybody spoke about, which is what is happening today. So over those 13 years, we went through a very unusual path. We went through a process of actually acquiring 3 international companies. We acquired one in Germany, then one in the Netherlands, and then finally in the US. And most of 2 out of 3 of these companies were public companies, and we acquired a portion of them. At every single point, these companies were bigger than us, and a bigger and more well-known brands than us. But we, I think, took it on in our stride, built one of the largest genomic services companies worldwide. I was spending a lot of time back and forth between the US and India. And I think we built a very capable, very interesting business. But we had 3 continents to manage, and it was also the time of consolidation. So there were some challenges that came our way because we had to figure out what was going on with the pharmaceutical world and everything else. And I think around those times when we were going through the biggest challenges, I think was the time that I decided that I would take a break and go to the ocean and reflect on things that would actually make sense for the future. And I think that was the time that the idea of what we could do for the consumer came up. And we said, this was something that, I felt was what was our calling, because it was an area that I was in for the last 12, 13 years. And it was something that I believed that would be going towards the consumer, and that we had to do this very quickly. So that's how the whole concept of Mapmygenome came into place. And I was thinking about how we would be able to build a product like this, because it was not something that was even available in India at that point of time. So we said, how do we build a brand? How do we build something where people don't even know what this concept is all about? And then I thought about, what are the closest things to that? And then when you're looking at this, and I was reading a book, I think this was a book where we were looking at, risks, and looking at compass, and you're looking at financial risks and other things. And one of the thoughts that came to me was that, when you look at a lot of us when we are born, what is the one thing that we were thinking about? We go to actually look at what our future is going to be like. And so if we are going to build something that was going to be about our future, about our health, about marriage, and about babies, I think the one thing that sort of, even though that is not scientific, was or not science in the way we look at it, was the Genomepatri. So we said, if you look at it from that perspective, I think it made a lot of sense for us, and to actually call the product Genomepatri, because it sort of built itself over that concept, and it was sort of a wordplay on that. So now, when you think about what we are doing in the genome, we are basically trying to understand this book that you have, which is your genome, and it's about 3.2 billion base pairs each, right? Which means that if you had to take out any cell of your body and you had to basically put it down in strands and put it down in a book, it would be like having 23 pairs of chapters, and in each of them you have paragraphs that are genes, but they are all written in a language which only uses 4 letters, that is A, C, T, and G. And this is the part that I think maybe is exciting and interesting for all of us, because in the end we all started from somewhere, and we've all moved around the world, and we are today 99.9% like each other, but we are very different in some aspects. And that uniqueness is coming because the genome is a book that writes itself, where you're continuously adding, deleting, and amending over the last 4 billion years, which means that a lot of the changes, a lot of the uniqueness for each other has come through those additions and deletions. And that's sort of what we do when we are reading somebody's genome, right? So when you think about what is going to happen in the future, I think we will have a lot more robots. Our AI will be much better developed. There'll be personalized medicine. There's going to be same-day cancer treatment. There'll be batteries that will be far superior. We'll have treatment for diseases like Alzheimer's. There'll be treatment with cells and better vaccines. The truth is that I think the future is already here, and it is now. And when you think about it from that perspective, I think anything that when you look at anything about your own life and your own health involves 3 main factors. One is that book that I was talking about, the 3.2 billion letters of genetics that make a difference. The other is the environment that we live in, because a lot of times, if you live in an environment which is cancer inducing or anything else, I think that's whether it's pollution, whether it is radioactivity, whether it's anything else, that's sort of your environment. And then, of course, is your lifestyle. That is a lot in your control, because you can make those changes in your own lifestyle. So I think that was the thought behind saying that, if we build something like this, what is it that we are trying to put these together? So that's what we do. And I think, and we do a lot more now, but let me just talk about the one thing that we are best known for, which is the first thing I started off in 2013 and called Genomepatri for the reasons I mentioned, is to be able to build something that is a do-it-yourself product. People can just order it online, get a kit at home, take their own swabs, send it back to us, and then they get a 100-page report that will sort of tell them about their genetic risks, with a lot of detailed information about that condition as well. So as you can see in this particular case, we can see that this person has a high genetic risk for blood pressure and also obesity and lactose intolerance, and a medium risk for PUFA deficiency, and so on. And same with the age-related macular degeneration. So we are looking at a vast variety of different conditions and other things. And the idea really was that when you look at all of this, you don't look at it in isolation. You have to look at anything that comes with the genetic risk as something that you will also connect with your lifestyle and the environment, because that's ultimately what decides the outcome. And changes in your lifestyle can have a huge impact when it comes to your actual disease condition. So I think that's sort of what we have been doing in Genomepatri. And the idea is that once we get that lifestyle information and their clinical information, we would then schedule a counseling one-on-one, so that you can actually help people understand what changes in their lifestyle they can make, what kind of tests they can do, and so on. So it's sort of like a way to be able to continuously engage with the consumer and be able to then have that as what we call as a book of life. Now, please, please feel free to tell me what kind of if you have any questions, and I can keep on talking. So, I would like to be able to talk through some of the areas that would be of interest. And I know right now everybody knows a little bit about genomics thanks to the pandemic. But when you think about genomics and the pandemic, and you wonder how they are connected, I think some things are obvious, but the others are not necessarily. And in many ways, I think the pandemic has also changed our business. So just to give a little sense of what has happened over the last 1.5 years, when we first heard about the pandemic in January, February of 2020, we really thought that this was an area that we could really make a difference in, because back in 2010 in Osmum, we were one of the few companies that had actually built when H1N1 had come about. We were one of the few Indian companies that actually made an RT-PCR kit and got through the whole process of ICMR and all of that. So when we heard about this new pandemic that had hit us, I think that was the first idea. But we were wondering whether we should even do that or not. But I started off with two things. One was to educate the average consumer. So we started writing a lot in simple language so that people could understand that what is the virus, what is the science behind it, what does it mean to get a test, and so on. But we also got involved with a lot of zero surveys or projects that were going on with the government, state governments. We were trying to help these state governments, trying to understand how they can use testing methodologies and other things. What were the ways that they could be able to do that? And I was doing it in collaboration with a large number of other collaborators from the academic world and from across the world. So I think that was sort of what we did. But over the last 1.5-2 years now, we built 2 COVID labs. We have one which include one at the airport in Hyderabad. We also, because of COVID, we also started doing a lot of the blood testing, primarily for doing neutralizing antibodies and IgG. But we then also incorporated other COVID markers, immunity profile, blood test, preventive blood testing, and so on. And the idea behind that was really that we would be able to use this model, because this would ultimately tie in with what we do in Genomepatri, as well as our clinical part, which I haven't mentioned about, and be able to make something that is of much more value to our customers. So when you look at something like a Genomepatri, which is where you're looking at the future, you also want to be able to make sure that people can be as honest as they can about their current health, and therefore make a much better assessment. So that's sort of how we went into the whole preventive blood tests part of the business. And we also, because our business became now a 24-hour business, we now went from turnaround times of being able to do things in 3 to 4 weeks to now doing it in 3 to 4 hours to now in 10 to 15 minutes. So I think that's the sort of change that has happened in terms of what our business has been able to do. And the idea is that, as we go through this process, we would be able to actually move closer towards our vision of saying, when we look at longevity, when you look at wellness, and you look at all of that, how do we actually make that difference in our, for our customers? And so, going back to, genomics and its impact on pandemics, I think one that everybody is familiar with is the testing for RT-PCR. I think almost everybody would have done a test over the last 2 years. The second is that when you're looking at different variants, and you've heard a lot about the alpha, beta, delta, and other variants, all of these variants are found through sequencing, which basically means you're isolating the virus, you're then sequencing it, and you're able to then say, is this a newer version of what we saw? And if it is it going to be more infectious? Is it likely to be neutral, evading the whole neutralizing antibodies and so on? So it is to be able to sequence these new variants. It was also used to find new drug targets, finding vaccines, and making diagnostic kits and understanding our immune response. So you're looking at not just what the COVID virus did, but you're also looking at what our own human body does in response to the virus and so on. So I think it is trying to understand the risk when it comes, because you would have noticed that some people, hit by the same virus can respond very badly, and the others can respond relatively well to these things. So I think these are all things that genomics has been able to make a big difference in. Again, I think a lot of times people are familiar with the RT-PCR method, but there are also other testing methods like CRISPR, LAMP, and other PCR-based tests, like what we do as an isothermal uh, amplification with rapid tests. Those of you who travel to Dubai and others would have noticed that you would have to get one rapid PCR test just before you board a flight and so on. So I think these are the kind of things that you do to look for the presence of the virus. And the second is to be able to look for if the virus was ever present. So you're trying to find if there are antibodies that came in response to that. And there are also other tests that you do to be able to look at if there is an infection and how severe is the infection, and to look at the regular CT scans to be able to do that. We won't go into detail unless someone has a question on the COVID genome, but this is, it's about a 30,000 base pair long genome that you're looking at to be able to then identify where are the changes that are happening to the genome. And similarly, there are many types of different variants that are there, and some of them were associated with the countries that they were in first. But eventually, I think, and luckily for all of us, I think now they are now naming it as alpha, beta, delta, lambda, and so on. Then there is the other part, and I think this is what I started with, which was to say what is Genomepatri, for instance. But when COVID first came, one of the things we did was to be able to use that information and use more details about information that was there on the previous SARS and other aspects of immunity that we could then supply to our customers, and therefore they could be better prepared for something like this. And that's where we came up with Genomepatri immunity, where we are looking at the SARS-CoV-2 susceptibility, the cytokine storm, comorbidities, and nutrients, and so on. So this would be, again, a very similar kind of a test that would allow you to be able to look at risk for certain comorbidities, or look at certain susceptibilities and look at severity of the disease that are likely to happen. And then, of course, all of you know that there are many vaccines that have been there, but I won't go into detail about that. So I'd like to quickly, at least end with another favorite quote of mine, which says that history repeats itself in part because the genome repeats itself. And the genome repeats itself in part because history does. And this is by Dr. Siddharth Mukherjee in the book called The Gene. And for those of you who haven't read his books, I think it's a fantastic book to be able to read. Both his books are really great to read because he actually goes into great amount of detail in making scientific writings look like poetry. So with that, I think I would be happy to take questions that you may have, so that we can look at things that all of you would be more interested in.
Sure.
Sakshi?
So yes, Anu, I'm here. So firstly, it was great listening to your journey, and thank you. And we really appreciate from PayU that we heard your story of how you have you were very deeply involved in the COVID pandemic, trying to give your best. So we really appreciate from PayU for being one of the warriors, which I personally just found out that you did. A few questions we have received, a mix of course, your entrepreneurial journey and a little bit about, genomics. Firstly, you've been a female entrepreneur, and it's a very different and challenging field. And I'm sure, back when you kind of thought or inspired of being a part of it, things would have been very different. So, what really inspired you to kind of choose this field, get into this journey, and any particular challenge you would want to highlight to the viewers who's watching, or people who would want to start their entrepreneur journey in the same field, or similar challenging field?
So I would say that when you are moving into something that is a knowledge-driven field, and a field that is new, I think you have to be prepared for a long gestation period. Right? It's not something that you would start making, money immediately as you launch the business. I think it takes a lot of time and effort to be able to get to that. And I think I was aware of that, that aspect, and I think that um, because of that, I think it kept me also very agile in terms of how you look at the business models. And a lot of times, I think we also changed our business model rapidly in order to be able to look at this changing field. So if you look at the genomics field from the year 2000, when we first started, and Ossimum Biosolutions, when we started, I think Ossimum name actually stood for Tulsi, which is the plant that is worshipped, and I think many of you would have had it in chai, in many
Right.
other things. But our initial business plan was really to be able to sequence medicinal plants and be able to then use that data for patenting and various other things. But of course, there was a change in patent laws. We changed our business model. So there were things that change upon you. And in a space like genomics, I think there have been many, many such changes. And these changes are vast environmental changes or vast like business changes that have happened. And I think that's the exciting part, but it's also the part that you have to be very prepared to be able to say that if this is not the case, how do you quickly adapt to a
Right.
newer sort of an environment? And I think that if somebody goes into genomics even right now, I think that would be true. It is a very, very fast moving field, and therefore you have to be prepared for both quick success and quick failures as well. If but after a certain point of time, because there is a learning curve, and I think once you've achieved that learning curve, you'll be able to do that.
Right. Sure. I also heard about, how you picked up the word or the brand name, Genome where you kind of merged what a consumer in India is actually thinking from the start, right? And any other example you would want to give where you kind of, linked or, how a Indian consumer reacts to or adapts to such kind of, business or product?
I think in many cases the consumer does, and I think this is true of not just in the space that we are in, but when you look at even music, I think, or anything else, I think you need something new, but you also need something old to sort of connect it to. And I think that is true of I think most brands that are there in the country or outside as well. Because if you don't have a little bit of familiarity with it, then you sort of lose interest in that altogether. But if it is the same old thing, then there is no interest in that also. So I think for any brand, I think there is that bit of putting the old and the new together to create a recall, but also to bring that uniqueness in it. And I think in some ways it's like the genome, right? I mean, a lot of it is there, but I think it is the differences that allow us to be able to be unique, right? So each of our genomes or our software that has been written for each one of us is slightly different from the others. And I think that's what you need to make a differentiation of your brand, but also to be able to uh, connect it with something that people are familiar with.
Right. I have few more questions from the audience. One is, what are your thoughts on the future of personalized genome being integrated in, a daily lifestyle?
So I think, and I think it is that day is not very far off where it will become part of your regular records, medical records. And the reason for that is that the costs have been going down quite significantly. So when we started in 2013 to now, I think just to give a sense of where the costs have gone, I think in 2000, when the first genome project was done, it cost few billions of dollars. When it came to 2011, when Steve Jobs wanted to do his own whole genome, when he was first told about his cancer, at that point it was more than $100,000 just to sequence one genome that is there. Today, I think when you look at it, I think your Genomepatri and others are in the range of $100, right? So I think there is, and the whole genome is maybe around, a little bit about 1,500 or 2,000, between 1,500 and $2,000. So there's been a rapid decline in terms of where the pricing has come. And I think at some point it will become even more possible for most people to be able to afford one. And the reason it is valuable is that for most consumers, I think you go about your life, sometimes you'd have found that there are people that who look very healthy and everything was fine, and then all
Right.
of a sudden there's something happens to them, and you are shocked and surprised, and it leaves a lot of people very, very depressed. And I think this is where you can look at one. You can look at where you can say that are there hidden things that you cannot find out with a regular blood test that will help you to sort of at least be aware that you might be at risk for something like let's say sudden cardiac arrest could be one. Or it could be something else that otherwise you wouldn't have tested for, because not everyone even does a full blood test also regular. I think most people might even a lot of people don't even do a sugar test, for instance, right? So you don't test for HbA1c in a normal case. So I think for a lot of consumers, we find that people typically do not test, or even if they test, they find it very late. So once you have this, and this is you're doing it only once, it becomes a lot more valuable for you, because you can now basically have a sense of what you are likely to be at risk for, and therefore test for that on much more frequently than you would otherwise do, and be able to get you better adjusted. So I'll give an example. I think I know I'm at risk for type 2 diabetes, and I think we have family history and all of that. Of course, I've not been anywhere close to that. But in order to mitigate that, one of the things I did was I I got this continuous glucose monitor, and I was trying to find out, which food is likely to increase my sugar levels and which is not, so that I could make those adjustments in my own diet and so on. So I think a lot of times, once you are aware, you are likely to make certain changes in your lifestyle that will reduce the overall risk that you're likely to be at. So I forgot now what your question was.
No problem. And also, addition to this question, we received another question is that we were speaking about, how involving this into a lifestyle will in future, be an integral part of a person's, daily activity. There's an additional question or a, follow-up question to this by one of our audience, that how early do you think an individual should kind of, be aware or integrate this into their lifestyles?
So I think it is. I mean, of course, you can do it at birth, but the question is, at that point, then you do it as a family, right? So when people just have, let's say, when you look at genomics as a whole, I think there are many aspects, and I think I've currently only focused on the preventive piece of it. We also do a lot of the clinical aspects and the carrier screening aspect. So I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if you, let's say, look at somebody at birth or even prior to birth, one of the ways that you do a genomic test is to look at the mother and the father. You look at their, whether they have certain, if they are carriers of certain disease, and see if there's going to be a match, right? So you match their genomes and see if that is something that they need to do. This is before you have a baby. Second is, when you have a baby, you want to make sure that is there something in the baby, both in terms of looking at it when it's still in the womb. So you're trying to find out if the baby is likely to have things like Down syndrome and others. So these are more genetic disorders. Or when the baby is born, let's say you have find out that the baby has G6PD, you can make corrections by looking at changes in their diet, of because of there is a certain implication for it when the baby is just diagnosed with that. So I think some of it are when you're just born, you want to diagnose so that you can make those changes right then. Some of them are not some not invasive, and the others are invasive. So that would be what you do for a baby. Then you move on. You want to make changes in your wellness or your prevention. I think then it has to be done by families, where you sort of look at somebody's genome and see if you want to make those changes early on in life, or at least make it on early enough so that you are not yet to a point where you have, where you're likely to get that condition. But you could look at it from a perspective of nutrition and fitness, right? So when you are a child, let's say you have a 10-year-old child or a 12-year-old child who likes to play games, you can look at that same report, and you can look at the aspects that sort of look at just what kind of nutrition is good for this child. Second is what kind of fitness level activities are likely to be beneficial. So some people, for instance, are have the sprint gene, so they have a muscle that is called the fast twitch muscle, and therefore they excel more at faster sports versus something that is more longer endurance sort of thing. So I think when you look at something like that, and as you grow older, I think you start realizing that when you hit to your closer to your 40s and 50s, then things like diabetes and hypertension sort of start to become reality. But if you had already taken care of it, it would be better. But if you haven't, then at least when you are getting to that age, you would do that. And then there are the conditions like your Parkinson's, your Alzheimer's, and others that come at a later stage. So it all depends on what the consumer really wants, how much information they want at what stage of their life. But ideally, I think you could do it at birth for everybody and reveal the information in bits and pieces as to when it is necessary to that particular individual. That's my thought. I think, like I said, it depends on everybody's personal choice in terms of what they would like to do with that information.
True, very true. Okay, so there are a few more. One is again, our guest mentions that can genomics help an individual understand if they are susceptible to COVID?
Yes, so that was what I was mentioning. That there are few things, few aspects of COVID. So we can look at, for some people, they are more likely to get a more severe reaction to it, and some people are likely to have a cytokine storm, which is a reaction where your own immune system is reacting against that. So that we could understand those aspects to that, and you can also look at other comorbidities to be able to have that, and that's sort of what we do in the in the immunity report, where we are looking at certain aspects that are likely to have an impact on how the COVID pandemic is likely to have an effect on you. So some of it is a lot of this is based on your own genotype, in terms of how you would respond in terms of getting it, but also how severe and of a reaction it is, and whether you have the right kind of nutrition that would be necessary for making sure that you are adequately equipped from an immune perspective.
Sure. So on comorbidity, one more thing, people with similar comorbidity are reacting very differently to the virus as well as to the vaccine, if I may add. I- is this somehow related to, genes and genomics?
Genes, genomics, but also what you have done to your body so far, right? I mean, it is also your lifestyle that has made it where it is. So I recently, for instance, I realized that even though I'm fairly careful, I think during the pandemic I didn't do all the activities that I normally do, which I think most of us did not. And so I realized that I'm also getting to that age where there are other changes that are happening. So I think it is not just about your genes. It is also about how you've been eating, how you've been, whether you've been smoking, drinking, and various other aspects of your life that make a difference in how you react to it. So it is not easy enough. It is not as simple as saying that if you are 20, if you are 60 years old with diabetes, you'll get, because there might be people who are just diabetic, but still, so that is whether they are genetically diabetic or whether they have become diabetic because of over the way they are actually leading their current lifestyle. I think that makes a difference. So I think it's not as simple as saying that it's only the genes, but the genes have a very important role to play when it comes to how you react to some of these, whether it's a vaccine, whether it is just in terms of how you react to COVID or how you react to a certain drug as well. So that aspect, the part where you react to drugs, that's an area which I did not cover. But we also look at the whole. We look at about 100 different drugs and see how you react to these drugs, right? So some people you would have found, and let's take an example of let's say, a lot of times during this pandemic, I think many old drugs were given, right? I mean, drugs that were already used earlier. So you find that most of these drugs have a genetic aspect to it. So some of us will metabolize that drug well, some of us will work well with a certain dosage, but the others will not. And I think that whole science is called the science of pharmacogenomics. And you can look at these drugs and see if you are likely to be one of those people who will react well to the drug, and or whether a higher dose is required. So a doctor who is proficient at understanding this information will be able to look at your report and then say how to make those changes. So I'll give an example. When my mom was diagnosed with diabetes only a couple of years ago, she was given the same drug that my dad was given, and my dad responded to it beautifully. He was using it for 32 years. It worked beautifully for him. But I think for my mom, that didn't work well. And then when I looked at her report, it said that in her report as well. So we showed it to the doctor, changed that report, changed that, and I think it worked well. Because there are always alternatives that you can find that will work well for one person or not. So I think from a pharmacogenomics perspective, it is very important to understand if that drug is likely to be the right drug for you.
Sure. We have, two more questions. One is, you've come from an engineering background. You kind of, entered this whole, genomics, segment. You've seen the rise and the change, and how technology has now become a very important part of, medical science. What are your thoughts with regards to, technology and medicine being together in the near future?
So I think we're already seeing that, right? I think when you look at the whole world of genomics, it's basically you're looking at a lot of data and machine learning.
Data.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're basically connecting that with information that's already out there in the clinical world, right? And I think that's where you start seeing value out of it. So when when someone does a test for us, I think that sort of feeds into the aspect, and it's continually improving our own algorithm that is there. So I think technology is, at least in the genomics world, is extremely, extremely important, because I think that's what is driving a lot of the risk scores that we come up with, a lot of the relative risk that we come up with, and all of that. But I think ultimately, I think when you look at it from even for all of us, right, and you look at how we've typically looked at our health, I think we went to a doctor when we were very sick, and therefore I think it's usually a little bit late to be able to get the right treatment. So I think if you had the right data, for instance, if you had your genomic data, you had your blood reports, and you had everything, and you had it in one place, and it allowed you to be able to make those decisions where you don't have to think. The doctor also will now be, reminded of their patient's health. I think then you have a much better way of looking at technology that can really help the healthcare system to be able to deliver better results. Because otherwise, I think especially in India, I think when you have a doctor who has so many patients, it is very hard to be able to then devote that kind of time to be able to look at the trends, look at everything. And I'm sure all the doctors can do that. It is just that they don't have the time to be able to do that for every single customer. And I think this way, it not only empowers the individual, it empowers the doctors as well. So I think, marrying technology with health, I think is inevitable, and it's already starting to happen, I think, in some areas. And I think we can do with a lot more as well.
True. We have one more question from a viewer is that, when you entered or when you started, Genomepatri, it was back when the market wasn't ready, right? It was very unaware, scattered. You've seen it evolve. And of course, the pandemic, I'm sure, has given it an upliftment, made a lot of people aware, What is your thought with regards to this segment in India specifically?
So I think that there is a huge potential in the segment, but clearly I think when we entered the space 20 years ago, I think it was our markets were mostly outside of India at that point of time. So when you look at it from 2001 to 2012, I think we mostly looked at most of our business was B2B, and it was with large pharmaceutical companies, with biotech companies, and so on. Our consumer marketing started primarily around 2013. And I was very aware that this was not something that everybody knows. And it was not something that we even did, yeah, I knew it would take a lot of effort and time, but I said if it was not me, who already has been in the field for 12, 13 years, then who would take that plunge? Because it's not easy for someone to make that plunge when they are not yet familiar with that this thing. Except when you are very young and at that point somewhat foolish, you might still do it. So I think that's what I did when I was getting into my first company. But I think if we didn't have enough foolish people who take the plunge to do the thing at the first time, I think the world doesn't evolve. And I think that's where I believe that um, you know, and I'm very happy that I not only jumped into a field like this, but I've stayed in it for 20 years. And I think that is what I believe is can only be done if you are truly passionate about that space and see it evolve over the years. So I think there is potential, a lot of potential in India. But I think it is not something that can be done just by a company doing genomics. It has to be a change in terms of how healthcare is done, how doctors are trained and educated, because, and whether they have enough time for all of that. So I think somewhere we have to do a lot more work to be able to make this successful and make sure that this is something that everybody has is able to do that without having to really look for it, and it should be something that is then everybody's reach and attention.
Sure. I think you've not just stayed in it. I think you've stayed in this sector, grown it, and I'm sure you're leading it also. So, that's what through all that you've explained about your journey. That's my personal takeaway. You've actually answered the last question I wanted to ask you. That you've been an entrepreneur. You've have an exceptional journey in a segment which is niche, which is challenging, which was evolving, and which is of course different, right? I wanted to ask you that is there one key takeaway, or maybe your mantra you would want to share with anybody who's watching, anybody who's a budding entrepreneur. This is our August series of homegrown brands, and we would love to hear if you have any mantra to share.
So I think if you should get into a field if you like it, and I think whether you're driven to it by curiosity, whether I think you should be driven to it by a few reasons, and maybe the reason should not be what you read in the newspaper necessarily in terms of valuations and just financial growth, but I think in order to get into something that is you know probably a little bit long term, I think you'll have to look at it from something that you believe will truly make a difference in the world. And I think for me at least that has been the reason why I continue to stay in this field, because I don't think there is any technology that will make that much of an impact on our own human health and being. And therefore, I stay in this field. And I think it's the same when people are getting into a field which is finance and they truly believe that that's something that is going to change it for them. I think they can go through any obstacle that comes their way. But if you don't believe it yourself, then it becomes very hard. If you're driven by motivations that are not necessarily genuine or authentic, then it becomes harder to be able to traverse these obstacles, and obstacles will come. And I think that any entrepreneur will tell you that never will it be as simple, because if it was, then I think there would be 100 other people doing exactly the same thing. So I think that's what I believe, that if I'm doing something and it is difficult, I think it is the right thing, because then it's something that change that I've made in the world. And like I started off, I hope that I can do a little bit more to pass on the baton to the next generation that is wanting to do something, make a difference in whatever field that I have been in.
Thank you, Anu. I think it's really, again, repeating it, been inspiring to listen to your journey. Thank you once again for your contribution during this tough time. I think it's very important, people like you who help us get through this tough time. And thank you once again for being part of UpStart at PayU. Really appreciate your time. Thank you everybody who's watching us. Just want to add that we have the next session on Thursday. I would love if everybody who's watching us right now join us too. Manu, anything you want to mention before we sign off? Please feel free.
No, I think just stay safe, wear a mask, and and get vaccinated. That would be my this thing. If you have access to it, please do it. So hopefully we'll all get on to a normal lives quickly enough
Yes.
to make more changes in the world, positive changes. So thank you very much. Thanks,
Definitely.
Sakshi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anu. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching us. Have a great day.